Hey, you all know who I am, Mr. Gajeski, and I'm going to be the narrator for session 6, Judges and Kings. So please listen to the lesson. After wandering in the desert for 40 years, the Israelites finally returned to their promised land. God warned them, "You must completely drive out the corrupt people who live in the promised land, or they will give you endless troubles, and you will become just like them." But the Israelites ignored God's warning. Before long, they began to live like these corrupt people among them, taking on their destructive ways and worshiping their idols. The people were selfish and did whatever they wanted. In the midst of this chaos, other nations attacked and conquered the Israelites. When the Israelites were conquered, and began to suffer under enemy rule, they begged God for help. So God inspired courageous and wise leaders called judges to rescue them. Each judge led Israel to defeat their enemies and guided them back to living in God's ways. But at the end of each judge's life, the Israelites went back again to their evil ways and rejected God until the next time they were attacked. Then they begged God for help again. Time after time, God felt compassion for the Israelites and sent another judge to rescue them. This cycle continued generation after generation. Eventually, the Israelites decided they wanted to be like other nations and have a human king to lead them. God told Israel, "You are rejecting me as your king. Be warned, human kings will control you and take everything for themselves." But the Israelites did not listen. So God chose a very tall and handsome man named Saul to be king. Right away, King Saul and his armies drove out Israel's enemies and defended their borders. But King Saul treated the Israelites harshly and did not follow God's ways. God was not pleased with Saul and chose David to be the next king while he was still just a boy tending sheep. Saul didn't know anything about this, and David's time to be king would come years later. Meanwhile, King Saul was overcome with anxiety and depression. He had musicians play for him in hopes this would ease his troubled mind. One of these musicians was none other than David. He came to the palace every day to play his stringed instrument for the king, and David's music helped Saul to feel better. Soon the king grew to love David and made him one of his most trusted servants. David also became best friends with Saul's son, and later David married Saul's daughter. Before long, King Saul appointed David to command his armies. David had great success in battle and became so popular that the Israelites sang songs about his greatness. This made Saul extremely angry and jealous. Why are they giving David all the credit? Next, they'll make him king. The next time David was playing for him, King Saul became overcome with madness. He picked up a spear and hurled it at David. David dodged the spear, but the king kept attacking, determined to kill him. Shocked, David ran from Saul and hid in a cave. Saul's armies searched for David but couldn't find him. Cold, hungry, and afraid, David poured out his heart to God through music called Psalms. He sang, God, you are my rock, my fortress, and the one who rescues me. Others who were running from the king hid with David in the cave. This group of fugitives joined together to fight for Israel, even though King Saul and his armies were searching for them. Twice David was close enough to kill King Saul and take over as king. His ragtag group of followers pleaded with him, the king is crazy. This is your chance. But David refused and said, I would never harm the king. He was chosen by God. Soon after that, King Saul and his son Jonathan were killed in battle. When David heard the news, he was filled with sadness and wrote a song to honor them at their funeral. Before long, the leaders of Israel asked David to be the new king. King David did what was good and right for all the people, uniting them to follow God's ways. David deeply loved God, but he wasn't perfect. One afternoon, David looked out from his palace window and noticed a beautiful woman bathing below. He found out that she was the wife of one of his generals. David had her brought to the palace, and then he slept with her. She became pregnant. To hide what he had done, David gave orders to have her husband stranded at the front lines in battle, where he was easily killed. One of David's closest advisors, Nathan, knew what David had done. Instead of confronting David directly, Nathan told him a story about a rich man who took a poor man's sheep, even though the rich man had plenty of his own. At the end of the story, David reacted in anger. That rich man must be punished. Nathan told David, that man is you. You took something that was not yours. David fell on his face in shame. He broke down and cried, I have done something terrible against God. Nathan comforted him, saying, God will forgive you and spare your life, but your son's life will not be spared. Soon after that, David's young son became very ill and died. After David grieved for his son, he went to the tabernacle to pray and worship God. David went on to rule as king for many more years. He was loved by God and by the people of Israel. God told David, I've been with you since you were a boy tending sheep. You have followed me with all of your heart. Now you will be known throughout history. From your family will come many kings and a final kingdom that will never end.